This city stood completely isolated from the rest of the world. For 80 kilometers around, it was encircled by a steel wall, guarded relentlessly by automated machine guns and a tight military lockdown. Any living creature that approached, and anyone attempting to escape the quarantine zone, was shot dead without mercy. In 2008, a severe epidemic erupted in Glasgow, England. Those infected with the virus would descend into madness, their bodies rapidly decaying until death. Most terrifying was the virus's incredibly fast spread and the inability to identify its mode of transmission. All efforts to research a vaccine proved futile. In just 1 week, thousands had died. The government, utterly helpless, could only instruct citizens to self-isolate at home. However, this was merely a government lie. Officials and the elite had secretly evacuated. Civilians attempting to leave were shot dead by soldiers. Amidst the chaos, a little girl's eye was injured by shrapnel. Her mother pleaded with the soldiers for her child's life. One soldier, unable to leave the girl in that hellish place, compassionately took her along with the evacuation convoy. From that moment on, the inside and outside of the quarantine wall became two entirely different worlds. The government had constructed an 80-kilometer-long, 30-meter-high steel-clad isolation wall. The surrounding area was heavily mined. The airspace above was declared a no-fly zone. Not a single living thing could escape. Those trapped inside the quarantine zone could only fend for themselves, dying either from the virus or from extreme lack of resources. Eventually, scenes of cannibalism even emerged within the isolation zone. Civilization and social order completely vanished. Time advanced to 2035. The little girl, Sinclair, who had miraculously escaped into the isolation zone years ago, had become a seasoned special operative. Her injured eye was replaced by a high-tech bionic one, not only capable of recording and surveillance but also serving as a reconnaissance device, an indispensable aid for Sinclair on many dangerous missions. However, Sinclair carried a constant burden, the memory of her mother, whose face she had almost forgotten. Upon their parting, her mother had left a letter with a name and an address, but the isolation zone had kept them apart. Fortunately, Mr. Nelson, Sinclair's former superior, who had watched her grow, felt deep sympathy for her. He advised Sinclair to take leave, but she refused. This time, Sinclair had just completed a mission to dismantle a human trafficking ring. However, during the inspection, the special operations team discovered many infected individuals exhibiting symptoms identical to the old Glasgow virus. The government took this matter very seriously. It seemed that before long, London, too, would become a dead city like Glasgow. Some officials proposed initial home isolation, with evacuation only if the virus truly spread. But Nelson argued that this would simply repeat past mistakes. They needed effective countermeasures to prevent disaster. Just then, the Prime Minister secretly showed Nelson a document. It turned out that throughout the years, the government had been using satellites to monitor the isolation zone. From satellite images, they discovered that people were still surviving inside. This meant that those in the isolation zone had likely found a way to combat the virus, perhaps even developing a vaccine. If they could infiltrate the zone and bring the findings out, they could save everyone. Nelson chastised the Prime Minister for knowing about the survivors and only revealing it now. The Prime Minister countered that he wished to appear as a savior when disaster struck, emerging with survivors and a vaccine. Nelson, understanding the urgency, said nothing further to the Prime Minister. He directly ordered Sinclair to lead a small team on an infiltration mission. He knew Sinclair had waited a long time for this day. Before departing, Sinclair received information that Dr. Kane, the virus researcher, had also been trapped inside when the isolation zone was sealed. If a vaccine existed, he was most likely its creator. Sinclair boarded a helicopter to the isolation wall to meet her teammates. She was unaware that a battle was about to erupt in London. The Prime Minister and the financial conglomerate behind him had decided to unleash the virus to purge the lower classes. After inspecting their armored vehicles and equipment, Sinclair and her team, along with 2 virus experts, entered the isolation zone in 2 armored vehicles. The gate, sealed for over 20 years, finally opened. Although everyone was a seasoned warrior, a hint of unease lingered. They saw numbers on every house in the city. These numbers represented the people waiting to be rescued, but ultimately, they received nothing because the government had abandoned them long ago. They quickly reached St. Andrew's Hospital in the city. They intended to begin their investigation there, but inside, an eerie silence hung, with no signs of life. Just then, Chandler, who remained in the armored vehicle, detected that their signal seemed to be jammed. Turning, he saw the image of a girl on the screen. Chandler quickly got out of the car to investigate, found the girl very weak, and brought her back to the armored vehicle. At the same time, the special ops team inside the hospital was attacked by survivors. Although their equipment was poor, they fought fiercely. As more people arrived, Sinclair could only lead the team in a temporary retreat. However, the situation was now beyond their control. Chandler, driving the lead armored vehicle, was attacked with a Molotov cocktail. The entire vehicle burst into flames. As he focused on dealing with the threat, the rescued girl, who had been behind him, quietly approached and stabbed him with a dagger. Before he died, Chandler pulled the pin on a grenade, killing both himself and the girl. Armored Vehicle Number 1 was destroyed. Armored Vehicle Number 2 had driven into the hospital basement. Sinclair fought and retreated, finally making it into the second vehicle. However, as the vehicle emerged from underground, survivors from above fired crossbows, piercing the driver. Armored vehicle number 2 lost control and overturned. Everyone scrambled out of the vehicle to face the enemy. Although their firepower was strong, the survivors in the isolation zone seemed utterly fearless. Apart from 2 members who seized the opportunity to escape, Sinclair and the rest were captured. After running out of ammunition, Sun, the leader of the survivors, chained Sinclair and subjected her to various tortures. He wanted to know which faction Sinclair belonged to and where her modern equipment came from. Sinclair knew these people had lost all humanity, so she decided to say she came from outside the wall. To her surprise, Sun's reaction was very strange. It turned out that for years, Dr. Kane had always told them that there was nothing worth exploring outside. Sun also learned for the first time that people still existed outside. He had many friends who tried to approach the wall but were killed by flamethrowers and automated machine guns. He believed that if Sinclair could get in, she could also get out. Therefore, he decided to spare Sinclair's life to use her as a key to open the door to the outside world. Sinclair's other teammates were not so lucky, all became food for the survivors. The survivors' lives were quite varied, including entertainment such as acrobatics and fireworks, but also brutal torture. However, what excited these survivors the most was the grand feast of human barbecue. Sinclair's captured teammate realized his fate. The rage in his heart made him spit at the survivors, but the ensuing flames left only desperate screams. While the survivors were having their barbecue, Sinclair was trying to escape from prison. A guard brought her a plate of barbecued meat, preparing for her to taste her comrade. Seeing this, Sinclair quickly grabbed the chain from the guard's ear with her right hand, forced him to open the door, then knocked him unconscious. Another guard, still examining a stolen watch, didn't have time to react before Sinclair knocked him out cold as well. But as Sinclair was about to sneak away, a girl in another cell called out to her. Sinclair initially didn't want to pay attention, but she stopped when she heard a certain phrase. It turned out the girl was named Callie, Kane's daughter. She could help Sinclair find Kane. As Sinclair prepared to open the old door, Sun's girlfriend rushed in. Clearly, she was also a seasoned warrior, but perhaps due to malnutrition and lack of professional training, she ultimately died at Sinclair's hands. Sinclair arrived at the prison. Upon hearing that Sinclair and Callie had escaped, Sun immediately roared with fury. Sinclair led Callie and 2 surviving teammates to the train station, but their tracks were exposed, and Sun's forces pursued them fiercely. Seeing this, Sinclair quickly got on the train to provide cover. After everyone was on board, she jumped on at the last second, leaving Sun and the others behind. Sun stared blankly as the train departed, then furiously killed his subordinates. On the train, Callie said she could help Sinclair find Kane, but she didn't want to meet her father. It turned out that Dr. Kane was now also the leader of a faction. He told everyone that the outside world was not worth exploring, a lie convenient for his dictatorial rule. The twisted leader, Sun, was actually Kane's son, Callie's biological brother. Later, Sun and Kane had a disagreement. As Kane became more unpredictable, Callie sensed danger and left Kane. But to her surprise, her brother had also become brutal, so she too was imprisoned. As they spoke, the train quickly stopped in a secluded mountainous area. They entered an air raid shelter containing many supplies. Clearly, someone had intentionally gathered them there. After passing through the tunnel, they entered a forest. Just then, Callie detected something unusual and called out to Sinclair to run. But Sinclair chose to stay. Very quickly, several spearmen charged out. Sinclair and her teammates decided to surrender. In reality, with guns in hand, they could have resisted. But Sinclair believed this was the fastest way to meet Kane. Otherwise, in the deep mountains and forests, it would be very difficult to find Kane quickly. Callie, who tried to hide, ultimately could not escape. They were all escorted to Kane's castle. Soon, Sinclair and the others met Kane. She was eager for answers about everyone's survival, and whether there was a vaccine. But Kane said there was fundamentally no vaccine. The reason people survived was that the adaptable survived, and the immune survived. He believed that in this chaotic era, the immune were the chosen ones, while those who could not resist the virus should be eliminated. Sinclair was very puzzled by Dr. Kane's change. Kane said that since the moment the government erected the isolation wall, everything had changed. From then on, Kane was filled with hatred for those outside and did not want anyone to come and seize his power. He knew the outside government was certainly monitoring the isolation zone. Therefore, he chose to build his base in this secluded mountainous area to avoid leaking information. He decided to execute Sinclair. Sinclair thought that this time, escape would probably be difficult, and the isolation zone was perhaps a mistake. But in reality, the outside world had also fallen into complete chaos. The virus spread wildly, even the Prime Minister's office was attacked. An infected person almost touched the Prime Minister and the financier Canaris. Fortunately, Nelson managed to shoot the infected person in time. However, the Prime Minister still met a tragic end because the infected blood splattered on his face. Seeing this, Canaris ordered the Prime Minister to be abandoned. The Prime Minister died. The entire ruling class in England began to squabble. Inside the isolation wall, Sinclair faced her execution. It was a medieval-style duel, with the difference being that her opponent had armor and weapons, while she was unarmed. This was an unfair fight, originally just entertainment for Kane and the survivors. However, Sinclair did not give up. She used her agility and movement to injure her opponent. But her bare hands simply couldn't contend with armor. So, she found an opportunity to jump onto the stands, seizing a weapon from a guard. Sinclair, emboldened, finally used her agility to counter and defeat her opponent. Kane, furious at this sight, immediately ordered Sinclair's execution. Unexpectedly, at that very moment, the entire castle shook violently and began to collapse. It turned out that Sinclair's teammates had not abandoned her. He admitted to killing the guard along with the virus expert and Callie, escaping from prison, and simultaneously causing this massive explosion. An archer seized the moment when Sinclair was exposed, intending to shoot her dead. Fortunately, a teammate spotted him in time and shot the archer with a pistol. Afterward, they met up, stole some horses, and galloped away. Kane's subordinates relentlessly pursued them in a horde. Sinclair and the others found a new vehicle in the air raid shelter, a brand new, limited edition Bell car. Next to it were several fuel drums. Everyone was overjoyed. While fueling up, they searched for other useful items. Sinclair even found many brand new mobile phones in their boxes. As they finished preparing and were about to leave, Kane's subordinates arrived. Sinclair's teammate, who was covering their rear, was hit by an arrow and bravely sacrificed himself. Sinclair was deeply saddened, but this was no time for grief. She drove the luxurious Bell car out of the air raid shelter, finally escaping Kane's territory. Once outside, Sinclair used the stolen Nokia phone to call her superior, Nelson. She told him she had obtained the vaccine and was on her way back. Nelson also revealed the situation outside to Sinclair. The virus had spread widely, the Prime Minister was dead, and Canaris was now in power. Canaris, upon hearing the news, prepared to personally pick up Sinclair. However, Sinclair was then blocked by Sun. Small Santana police cars relentlessly pursued the Bell car, while motorcycles from both sides attacked. Sun drove a modified Pontiac convertible. Although its performance was not as good as the Bell car, the survivors' fanaticism made them cling tightly to the Bell car. Sun seized the opportunity to jump onto the Bell car and engaged in close combat with Sinclair and the others. When Sinclair and the others tried every possible way but still couldn't escape Sun, one of Sun's subordinates drove a bus to block the road. He intended to intercept Sinclair's Bell car. But at this point, Sinclair no longer held back. She drove the Bell car straight into the bus. As a result, the bus was split in half, while the Bell car was unharmed. Sun died in the collision. Very quickly, Sinclair met Canaris. She handed Callie over to him because Callie was immune. Using Callie's blood as a sample, they could research a vaccine against the virus. However, Canaris was not prepared to start research immediately. He said he would only step forward when everyone was at their wits' end. Only then could he become a savior in the hearts of the people. As for those already infected, he would let them perish on their own. The virus expert was very dissatisfied with Sinclair handing Callie over to Canaris. But he and Callie were both like fish on a cutting board, with no power to negotiate, they could only be forced onto Canaris's helicopter. Afterward, Canaris also wanted to recruit Sinclair to serve him. With such a superior warrior to assist him, his future path would be broader. But Sinclair refused and drove back to the isolation zone. This time, she had no mission. She returned only because she remembered the address her mother left, wanting to see if there were any old memories there, as well as a photo of her and her mother from when she was a child. Mr. Nelson knew Sinclair would definitely come here, so he also came. Sinclair handed Nelson a recording. It turned out that Canaris's words had all been recorded by Sinclair's high-tech eye. By simply releasing this recording, Nelson could overthrow Canaris. But Sinclair would certainly have to face Canaris's revenge. She had thought this through. She decided to stay in the isolation zone, wait until things settled down, and then return. As for survival in the isolation zone, Sinclair was not worried. She alone ventured through the territory of the survivors. The survivors had formed a rigid social mechanism. If Sinclair killed their leader, then Sinclair would be their new leader. Perhaps under Sinclair's leadership, these survivors would have a different future. This concludes the entire story of the post-apocalyptic film Doomsday. What do you think of this movie? If you liked it, please comment 111. If you found it just average, comment 222. Thank you for watching our video. Goodbye and see you again.